historic coronation ceremony of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth in the Abbey Church of Westminster. This service of transcendent beauty and importance is made by British Movietone News the subject of a special issue. The entrance. With pomp and solemnity, the immediate relatives of the King and Queen enter the church. Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret Rose arrive with the Princess Royal and sit down in the Coronation Theatre, where most of the great ritual is enacted, while their aunts mount to the royal box. The Duchess of Kent, holding her robes, passes in first, to be followed by the Duchess of Gloucester. Queen Mary, her train borne by, among 3 others, the Honourable Gerald Lascelles, her grandson, makes a stately entrance. The Royal Dukes of Gloucester and Kent take their seats at the front of the Peer's transept. Finally, after a long procession of religious, political and court dignitaries, come their Majesties. The Queen first, by the Royal College of Needlework, has for bearers. Following is the Mistress of the Robes, the Duchess Dowager of Northumberland. The King's entrance. He wears his cap of state, and his crimson robe of state is borne by the young Earl Hague, Earl Kitchener, his nephew Viscount Lascelles, and the Earl Jellicoe at the side of the little procession. By members of the royal family. The first rite of the ceremony is the recognition. Standing, the King turns to the east, and the Archbishop of Canterbury speaks to the people.
I present unto you King George, your undoubted king, wherefore all you who are come this day to do your homage and service, are you willing to do the same?
Altar, the Archbishop administers the coronation oath to the King.
Sir, is your Majesty willing to take the oath?
I am willing.
Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the peoples of Great Britain, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the Union of South Africa, of your possession, their respective laws and customs?
I solemnly promise so to do.
His Majesty signs his declaration, a document presented and held for him by the Lord Great Chamberlain. Then begins the first part of the communion service, for which the King and Queen advance to the altar. This part of the service, which is omitted, is followed by the anointing. Under a rich pall of cloth of gold held by 4 Knights of the Garter, the King sits down for the first time in King Edward's chair, and having taken off his cap of state and his crimson robe, he prepares for the ancient rite whereby David was made king at the hands of the prophet Samuel. The Dean of Westminster, who takes a prominent part in the service, now puts upon the King the colobium sindonis, or white surplice. Over this, a supertunica, or close pall of cloth of gold, is drawn, and a girdle of the same fabric is fastened around his waist. Attired thus, the King's heels are touched by the golden spurs by the Lord Great Chamberlain, the Earl of Ancaster. The sword of state is taken by the Archbishop of Canterbury and delivered to the King, who girds it around his waist. Presently he ungirds it and carries it to the altar. Further investitures ensue. The armil or stole is placed around the king's neck by the Dean of Westminster. The pall of cloth of gold, a beautiful vestment, is then put upon him. And the orb is delivered to him by the Archbishop. Over the fourth finger of His Majesty's right hand is slipped the King's ring. Then the sceptres are presented. One is the royal sceptre, the ensign of kingly power and justice. The other, the sceptre with the dove, is also known as the rod of equity and mercy. The Dean of Westminster brings the crown of England, St. Edward's crown, to the Archbishop. The climax of the ceremony is reached. The peers and kings of arms put on their coronets. The king is crowned. It remains for him to be enthroned. Leaving the coronation chair, he passes to the throne raised on a dais in the middle of the theatre. In the words of the liturgy, he is lifted up into it by the archbishops and bishops and other peers of the kingdom. The Archbishop of York touches his arm as he takes the throne. The peers who have carried the regalia group themselves around the steps. Homage. From the days of knighthood, this rite has been preserved. First, the Archbishop kneels before the king and swears to be faithful and true, and faith and truth to bear unto him. After the Archbishop, the princes of the blood royal perform their homage. The Duke of Gloucester, as the next eldest brother, kneels and swears to become the king's liege man of life and limb and of earthly worship. He kisses the king's left cheek in token of loyalty and moves backward from his presence. Each, as he comes to make his homage, removes his coronet and hands it to the page. The Duke of Kent repeats the same vow of allegiance as the Duke of Gloucester. The Queen has yet to be crowned. From her seat below the royal box, where she has sat watching the King's coronation, she walks slowly to the steps of the altar, supported on the right by the Bishop of Blackburn and the left by the Bishop of St. Albans. She kneels at a faldstool set before the altar between the steps and King Edward's chair, and the Archbishop reverently sets the crown on her head.
Receive the crown of glory, honor and joy.
Thus the words of the Archbishop, beautifully enunciating the ritual. The Queen, having received her scepter and the ivory rod with the dove, walks away from the altar. As she passes the King's throne, she curtsies, and her ladies with her, and takes her place on her own throne, set in the theatre beside and below the King's. After an interval, during which Holy Communion has been celebrated, their Majesties, attended and accompanied as before, descend from their thrones. They pass slowly before the royal box into St. Edward's Chapel on either side of the altar. The attendant peers receive the regalia from the Dean of Westminster, the Duke of Sutherland taking the orb. After the recess, the Queen reappears on her side of the altar, and her procession reforms for the departure from the Abbey. These distinguished people passing from the Abbey, the ceremony which is over, for which it stands, of the ancient culture preserved in its ritual, will have been, we hope, made memorable by this film.
Queen and I will always keep in our hearts the inspiration of this day. And may we ever be worthy of the goodwill which I am proud to think surrounds us at the outset of my reign. I thank you from my heart, and may God bless you all.